Opinion. Today I am reviewing the new musical Suffs with book, music, and lyrics, and starring Shaina Taub, directed by Leigh Silverman, and choreographed by Mayte Natalio, running at the Music Box at 239 West 45th Street in New York City. While you're sitting by the fire with your tea listening to this review, I hope you find a way to make it worth it to visit my Patreon page, where you can, for as little as $1 a month, help support my channel here, as well as my classic cinema podcast, Yesterday's Matinee. Thank you to my current patrons, especially my Neo and Hamilton patrons, and welcome to the new ones. I'll leave a link to my Patreon page in the description. Set in the early 1900s, leading up through the ratification and certification of the 19th Amendment, Suffs follows the story of Alice Paul, played by Shaina Taub, a real-life women's suffragist who formed the National Women's Party with Lucy Burns, played by Ali Bonino, in response to ideological differences with the National American Woman Suffrage Association. I'm sure historically it was probably more complicated than that, but for the sake of the musical, this is the main drive leading Alice and her associates. Alice advocates a more aggressive campaign for women's rights to vote, while NASA leader Carrie Chapman Catt, played by Jen Colella, calls for a more tempered and political approach, preferring to stay on the good side of President Woodrow Wilson, played by Grace McLean, in the hope that Wilson will be more inclined to press for a women's suffrage amendment. But with looming American involvement in World War I and Wilson's general dismissal of equal rights for women, there is no real headway being made. Tensions peak when the U.S. joins the war and the American government starts imprisoning people who speak out in any way against the war or President Wilson. Yeah, that really happened, and Alice, along with some of her colleagues, do spend time in prison for daring to question the legitimacy of the U.S.'s involvement in the war. Meanwhile, Alice has other conflicts going on, including with journalist Ida B. Wells, played by Nikki M. James, who calls out the National Women's Party and women's suffrage in general for not helping black women the way it would help white women. I thought Suffs was a wonderful show. There are those who are out there who are drawing comparisons to Hamilton, and I will concede that it is so to some degree, but to assume Suffs is a carbon copy of Hamilton would be selling Suffs short, and it should be measured on its own merits. Suffs stands on its own with its message and theme calling women to attention to never stop fighting for equality. Like the closing number beckons, keep marching. This is a musical about women securing their strength in each other despite what political differences may exist between each other and a federal government who views you as a nuisance more than anything else. Something I think some critics have missed in their criticizing Suffs is that the women who were advocating for the 19th Amendment, this was all they did. Alice Paul had little to no domestic life. She had a singular drive and objective, and this is what Suffs focuses on. She has occasional romances in her life, but nothing that amounts to anything that was too serious. So to fabricate some kind of domestic quality about her would be disingenuous, and frankly, I would find it a little insulting. Women's rights were the most important thing to her. So if you feel that the show is lacking depth of character beyond the suffrage movement, yeah, there might have been a good reason for that. There are some complaints I've heard about how Woodrow Wilson is represented, but I don't care about that either. It's intended to be a satirical take on a man who is more than a little misogynistic. So for its artistic representation, I'm all for it. Taub's score is rich and full of colorful ornamentations, and the arrangements and vocals. Repeated themes like Show Them Who You Are, Let Mother Vote, and If We Were Married instill melodies that will stay with the audience upon leaving the theater. There are some fantastic performances in Suffs. Shaina Taub's good as Alice Paul, but I found her real strength was in the writing of the show versus starring in it. That isn't to say she shouldn't have been in the show. There is a long history of composers performing in their own works. George M. Cohan, Betty Comden, Adolph Green, they were doing it back in the early half of the 20th century. So it's not a new thing. Taub's sense of humor as a writer comes through in the supporting performances by Ali Bonino as Lucy Burns, Kim Blanc as socialist Ruza Winkowski, and Doris Stevens, played by Nadia Dandashi, who has a great couple of scenes developing a relationship with Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State Dudley Malone, played by Salala Barak. Their song, If We Were Married, is laced with both tenderness and humor. Jen Colella is perfect as the proper and prim Carrie Chapman Catt, and Hannah Cruz gives a standout performance as Inez Milholland, who, true story, dressed up in a white cloak and crown and rode on horseback leading a women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. Emily Skinner is criminally underutilized as Alva Belmont, a patron of the National Women's Party, but she does get a fantastic song in the second act as Phoebe Byrne, mother of a Tennessee congressman who has a deciding vote on the certification of the 19th Amendment. Riccardo Hernandez's scenic design is fairly simple. There are some grand scenic elements like the parade and some of the framing elements that create scenes representing the White House or other grand buildings, but the stage is not too busy. There is an effigy of Wilson that gets lit up, which is a great moment. Paul Tazewell's costumes are great. There are some dresses, coats, and hats that are fantastic to look at, especially Emily Skinner's costumes for Alva Belmont. I think Suffs is a great show. In this horribly frustrating political world where women's rights seem to be going backward 100 years after they first started to get them, Suffs is a rallying cry not for only women, but people everywhere to keep marching. If you feel it doesn't do enough, that's fine, but I think Suffs is something to embrace with its message of liberty and equality. But I am only one man's opinion, so be sure to leave yours in the comments below. If you'd like to see Suffs, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get tickets. I'll also leave a link in my Patreon page. Don't forget to visit that as well. You can also support my channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and click the notification bell to be alerted to future reviews. My next review will be Hartford Stage's production of All My Sons. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the theater.